Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for your service to the nation and for your testimony today. I want to take a moment to turn to the Christopher Steele dossier, which was first mentioned in the media just before the election and published in full by media outlets in January. My focus today is to explore how many claims within Steele's dossier are looking more and more likely as though they are accurate. First, let me ask you, can you describe who Christopher Steele is?
No, not going to comment on that.
Are you investigating the claims made in the dossier?
Not going to comment on that, Mr. Castro.
Okay. Well, the reputation of the author, Christopher Steele, as a former accomplished British intelligence officer with a career built on following Russia is important. This is not someone who doesn't know how to run a source and not someone without contacts. The allegations it raises about President Trump's campaign aides' connections to Russians, when overlaid with known established facts and timelines from the 2016 campaign, are very revealing. So let's begin. In general, as my colleagues have discussed before, is it true that a large number of oligarchs and wealthy businessmen in Russia have profited from their continuing close relationships or cooperation with the Kremlin?
Could you say that one more time, sir?
Sure.
I want to make sure I understand.
Have oligarchs and wealthy folks in Russia profited from their connection to the Kremlin?
Yes.
And there are no free lunches in Russia. If you get wealthy under Putin, it's because you support Putin and are expected to support him. Is that fair to say?
I would assume there's a perception of advantage, but I would assume it also varies by the specifics of the particular individual and relationship we're talking about.
Okay. But Putin never just trusts, he verifies, right? As a former KGB man, he wants to keep tabs on his wealthiest citizens, especially those that could ever pose a challenge to him. Is that right?
Keep it, Miss? You want to keep it?
I assume he maintains knowledge of the situation around him to include particular centers of influence within Russia.
Thank you. So is it likely that the Kremlin would accept or actively trade favors or other valuable or sensitive information, intelligence from foreign figures about Russian oligarchs or wealthy businessmen living abroad?
Is it possible? Yes, but again, it depends on the particulars of the situation. I don't know that I would make a flat statement on that.
But it's certainly a possibility.
It's a possibility?
Okay. Well, the dossier definitely seems right on these points. A quid pro quo relationship seems to exist between the Trump campaign and Putin's Russia. A July 19, 2016 entry, for example, asserts that Russians were receiving intel from Trump's team on Russian oligarchs and their families in the United States. An entry from June 20th, 2016 states, quote, Trump and his inner circle have accepted regular flow of intelligence from the Kremlin, including on his Democratic and other political rivals, unquote, which is something for something. A July 30th entry likewise states that, quote, a source close to the Trump campaign confirms regular exchange with the Kremlin has existed for at least 8 years, including intelligence fed back to Russia on oligarchs' activities in the United States. Is it generally true that Moscow actively seeks and supports, whether through the oligarchs, overt Russian officials, or undeclared intelligence officers, sympathetic or cooperative foreign figures abroad, whether through business dealings or political backing or a combination of the two?
I think it's generally true.
I mean, generally this is a tactic. Generally it's a tactic we have seen over time, but again, I would caution us, we're talking about very specific cases theoretically here, and I'm not prepared to get in any of the specifics.
And I know that my colleagues have touched upon this, but I think it's important in the context of Christopher Steele's dossier to bring it up again. So my question is it likely or plausible that the Russians might seek out Americans for Moscow's purposes?
It is one of the focuses of our counterintelligence mission to try to understand the ways in which they try to do that. That's at the core of their intelligence gathering, is try and co-opt, recruit Americans to give them information.
So the dossier states in an entry dated August 10, 2016, that a, quote, Kremlin official involved in U.S. relations, unquote, suggests that Moscow might offer assistance to, quote, sympathetic U.S. actors. Does this sound like a plausible tactic out of the Russian playbook?
I'm not going to comment on that, Mr. Castro.
Okay. Now let's get even more specific. Among the U.S. actors, this Kremlin official mentions are Carter Page and Michael Flynn, whom my colleagues have already discussed at length and which the dossier describes as, quote, examples of successes by the Kremlin official. We know Carter Page went to Moscow on July 7th to give a speech to the new economic school. We're in possession of the slide deck from his speech there. And we know Carter Page obtained approval from Trump campaign manager at the time, Corey Lewandowski, as reported in Politico, citing National Security Campaign official J.D. Gordon. Now, let me ask you another question with respect to somebody else. Is it correct that Igor Senchin, the president of Russian oil giant Rosneft, is a former member of Russian intelligence and a longtime aide and confidant to Vladimir Putin?
Not going to answer that, Mr. Castro.
In an October 18, 2016 entry, the dossier states that during Page's visit to Moscow, he met with Igor Senchin, offering, quote, Page and Trump's associate the brokerage of up to 19% stake in Rosneft, with Page confirming that, quote, if Trump were elected U.S. president, sanctions on Russia would be lifted. And although, fortunately, the White House hasn't been so naive as to unilaterally lift sanctions on Russia, it was widely reported that on January 27th of this year, Rosneft sold a 19.5% stake in Rosneft in what Reuters calls, quote, one of its biggest privatizations since the 1990s. Furthermore, Reuters reported that, quote, public records show the ownership structure of the stake ultimately includes a Cayman Islands company whose beneficial owners cannot be traced. What a coincidence. Is this the subject of your investigation? One of the subjects of your investigation?
Same answer.
Okay.
Meaning I'm not going to comment.
I understand. So